Doctors refused to deliver the baby from a dying woman. But when one of the best surgeons made the incision, the obstetricians saw what was inside and froze in shock. Aurora gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, her fingers trembling as she fought to steady her hands. The car hummed softly as she drove, but the sound barely registered. Her thoughts were a tempest, churning with fury and heartbreak. Her stomach felt tight, not from the pregnancy but from the nauseating weight of her husband's words that morning. She could still hear his voice, calm but laced with selfish indifference, echoing in her mind like a cruel taunt. "Aurora, we decided to have kids too early. It's too soon. We're still young and my career is just starting to take off. And now, bam, everything's tied to kids for life. My career will go down the drain. We should have waited. Maybe it's not too late for an abortion. Have you asked your gynecologist?" The words struck her anew, sharp as a slap. Aurora clenched her teeth, her jaw aching from the tension. She hadn't responded earlier. She couldn't. The words had sucked the air from her lungs, leaving her in stunned silence. How could he even suggest such a thing? Too soon for children? The phrase burned in her mind, twisting like a thorn. They had been married for nearly 9 years. 9 years. Was that not enough time to prepare for building a family? Her throat tightened as she swallowed back tears, trying to focus on the road ahead. But the memory of their argument refused to fade, replaying in brutal clarity. This morning, after his words had landed like a bomb, she'd stood there, staring at him in disbelief. You can't be serious, Graham," she had finally whispered, her voice trembling. Graham, her husband, her Graham, hadn't met her gaze. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, a habitual gesture she once found endearing, but now seemed dismissive. "I'm just saying, Aurora," he said, his tone frustratingly measured. "It's not ideal. I'm not saying I don't want kids. I'm saying the timing is wrong. Maybe we can rethink—" "Rethink?" Aurora had interrupted, her voice breaking. "Rethink twins? Rethink lives that are already growing inside me?" Graham had shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her piercing stare. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I just think we rushed into this." The conversation had unraveled from there, her disbelief colliding with his feeble attempts at justification. Finally, she could take no more. Without another word, she'd grabbed her coat, slammed the door behind her, and left the house. Now the memory made her seethe with fresh hatred. She blinked rapidly, her vision blurring with tears that refused to fall. "My God," she thought bitterly, "this is Graham. My Graham. The man who has been my rock since our student days. How could he say such things? It's like I don't even know him anymore." Her mind wandered, unbidden, to her friend Astrid and her husband. During Astrid's pregnancy, her husband had been an image of devotion. He pampered her, brought her late-night cravings without complaint, and even carried her to bed when she felt too exhausted to move. "And mine?" Aurora's chest heaved as she fought back a sob. "Mine treats my pregnancy like it's a ball and chain around his ankle." Her heart twisted at the thought. When she'd first shared the news of her pregnancy, Graham hadn't smiled or hugged her. He'd simply nodded, his jaw tight. And when the ultrasound had revealed they were having twins, his reaction had gone from muted to hostile. "I'm not against having kids," he'd told her then, his voice cold and clipped. "You misunderstood me. I just think it should have happened later." Later? Aurora thought now, gripping the steering wheel tighter. When? When we're too old to chase after them. When I've given up on the dream of being a mother. Later is just an excuse for never. A sudden honk snapped her out of her spiral. She realized she had drifted slightly out of her lane and quickly corrected herself, her hands trembling. She pulled into the nearest parking lot, unable to trust herself to keep driving in this state. Turning off the ignition, she slumped back in her seat, her body finally succumbing to the tidal wave of emotions she had been holding back. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a strangled sob. "Why, Graham?" she whispered into the quiet of the car. "Why now? Why ruin everything when it should be the happiest time of our lives?" As the sob subsided, Aurora wiped her cheeks, determination hardening her features. She wouldn't let his doubts poison her joy. She would love these babies fiercely, even if Graham couldn't see past his selfish fears. And if he couldn't step up and be the father they needed, Aurora vowed to herself that she would do it alone. Caught up in her heavy thoughts, Aurora barely registered the world around her. She was lost in the whirlwind of emotions, replaying Graham's hurtful words over and over. Her mind felt like it was stuck in an unrelenting loop of anger, disbelief, and sadness. She didn't notice that she was drifting further from her exit until it was too late. By the time she realized, she was already in the farthest lane. Panicked, she tried to merge back, frantically checking her mirrors and turning the wheel, but the traffic was dense and the cars weren't slowing to let her through. The blaring honk of a horn cut through the chaos in her head. Then came the screech of tires. The impact came with brutal force. Her car jerked violently as another vehicle slammed into her rear, the sound of crunching metal and shattering glass filling the air. Aurora didn't even have time to scream before her body was flung forward, her head striking the steering wheel. Everything went black. Somewhere far away, like a sound carried across a great chasm, she heard a faint hum. It grew louder, taking the form of a voice. "What is wrong with you? Did you not see me coming from behind?" The voice roared, raw with anger. The man who had crashed into her car stormed out, his footsteps heavy against the pavement. But as he approached the driver's side window, his tirade faltered. Aurora wasn't moving. Her head rested against the wheel, her body limp. "Hey!" he shouted, alarm lacing his tone now. "Hey, are you okay? My God, are you alive? Say something, please!" Panic set in as he fumbled to open the door, peering inside. It was then that his eyes fell on her rounded belly, prominently visible beneath her fitted dress. He froze, his mind racing to comprehend what he was seeing. "She's pregnant," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of passing cars. For a moment he stood there, paralyzed by the realization. The sharp sound of Aurora's faint moan snapped him out of his stupor. "Thank God you're alive," he said, his voice trembling as he leaned in closer. "An ambulance is on its way. They'll take you to the hospital. You're going to be okay, I promise. I'm so sorry, so sorry," he stammered, guilt and worry etched on his face even though he wasn't at fault. Aurora stirred slightly, her head rolling to the side. Her eyelids fluttered, and she opened her eyes just enough to see the man's face. His wide, panicked eyes looked back at her, filled with concern. I broke the rules," Aurora croaked weakly, her voice barely audible. The man shook his head, brushing off her words. "That doesn't matter right now. Don't talk. Just focus on breathing. Help is almost here." Aurora gave a bitter, faint smile but winced sharply as pain coursed through her lower abdomen. The man noticed immediately his anxiety deepening. "What's wrong? Are you in pain? Where does it hurt?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. Without waiting for an answer, he crouched beside her and carefully pressed a clean cloth to the small cut on her forehead, providing what little first aid he could. Moments later, the wail of sirens pierced the air, and the man let out a shaky breath of relief. The ambulance pulled up swiftly, its red and blue lights reflecting off the nearby cars. Medics poured out, moving quickly to assess the situation. Faces swarmed around Aurora, their voices blending together as they spoke in calm, practiced tones. "Female, approximately 30, conscious but disoriented," one of the medics noted, his hands already checking Aurora's pulse. "Pregnant. Possible abdominal trauma. Let's get her on the stretcher." Aurora winced again as they lifted her gently, her breath shallow. She managed to whisper faintly, "My head, it's splitting, and there's sharp pain in my lower abdomen." The lead paramedic nodded, his expression grave but composed. "We'll take care of you, Ma'am. Just stay with us, okay? Keep your eyes open." As they secured her to the stretcher, Aurora's vision blurred. She caught a glimpse of the man who had hit her car standing nearby, his face pale with worry. Their eyes met briefly, and she could see the guilt and helplessness in his expression. A wave of terror swept across Aurora's face as her trembling hand instinctively moved to her belly. The sharp pain had subsided, but fear still gripped her heart. "My twins! What's happened to them?" she cried out, her voice breaking. She writhed on the stretcher, desperate for reassurance, the thought of losing her unborn children flooding her with panic. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her belly protectively, whispering under her breath, "Please, my darlings, please be okay." Aurora had lovingly referred to her unborn twins, a boy and a girl, as "my darlings" ever since the ultrasound. From the moment she knew of their existence, they had become the center of her world. They were deeply cherished by her, even as they were unwanted by her husband. "I'll never have an abortion," Aurora resolved through gritted teeth as the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. Her heart burned with defiance. "If he doesn't want them, I'll raise them alone. Period." Yet, despite her resolve, her nerves were frayed to the breaking point. The uncertainty clawed at her, her mind racing with dark possibilities. The rhythmic hum of the ambulance did little to soothe her. Every bump and turn only heightened her anxiety. The hospital staff moved swiftly upon her arrival, running tests and conducting ultrasounds. Aurora clung to the faint hope that everything would be okay, but the wait for answers felt excruciatingly long. It wasn't until the next morning that the silver-haired doctor entered her hospital room. He wore a calm, almost paternal expression, his presence commanding trust. Aurora sat up slightly, her heart pounding in her chest as she searched his face for any sign of bad news. "You're one lucky lady," the doctor began, offering her a reassuring smile. "Your babies are fine. Their heartbeats are strong and there's no sign of distress. The abdominal pain was caused by the impact, but it will pass. Just a little longer, though, and it could have been a different story." Aurora let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her hands flying to her belly as tears of relief streamed down her face. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, closing her eyes for a moment. Then, looking back at the doctor, she added, "Thank you. Thank you so much." The doctor nodded, his expression turning serious. "Aurora, my advice. Stay away from driving for the rest of your pregnancy. Stress and physical strain like this aren't good for you or the babies." Aurora nodded quickly, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe. No more driving. I promise." The doctor's gaze softened as he placed the clipboard on the counter. "That's good to hear. Now, as for your head, how are you feeling?" Aurora winced, pressing her fingers lightly to her temple. "It feels like it's splitting in two," she admitted. "The pain is unlike anything I've ever felt." The doctor frowned sympathetically. "Unfortunately, you've suffered a mild concussion. The headaches may persist for a while, but with rest you should recover fully. You'll need to stay here for a few days under observation." Aurora opened her mouth to protest, but the doctor cut her off with a firm yet kind look. "I know you want to get home, but it's crucial we monitor you and the babies for any delayed symptoms." She nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right. Then, as if remembering something unpleasant, she glanced up at him again. Have you told my husband?" she asked hesitantly, her voice tight. The doctor sighed, his professional demeanor unwavering. "We've already informed him. He was notified as soon as you were admitted." Aurora bit her lip, unsure whether to feel comforted or anxious. Part of her dreaded Graham's arrival, knowing it would only remind her of the cruel words he had spoken the day before. Would he even care that she and the twins had been in danger? As the doctor left her room, Aurora leaned back against the pillow, her hands still resting protectively over her belly. She closed her eyes and whispered softly to her unborn children. "You're safe, my darlings. No matter what happens, I'll keep you safe. I promise." Here's the revised and expanded version with added details and dialogue for a deeper emotional impact. Graham arrived later in the afternoon, his usual strict, emotionally distant demeanour in full force. He entered the room without a smile or even a flicker of concern on his face. Instead, his first words were cold and perfunctory. "How are you? When will you be discharged?" Aurora stared at him, momentarily speechless. She had hoped, prayed, for a shred of warmth or compassion, but his tone was clipped, devoid of any emotion. She took a slow, steadying breath before replying. "The doctor says I need to stay for a few more days for observation. I have a concussion, and they're monitoring the twins." Graham's brow furrowed slightly, not in concern but in annoyance. He crossed his arms, standing stiffly at the foot of her bed. "I heard the accident was your fault," he said, shaking his head in disapproval. "You should have been more careful. Now we can't even claim damages from the other driver. It's your fault. Do you know how much the car repairs will cost?" The words hit Aurora like a slap. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her chest tightened with anger and disbelief. "Are you done?" she snapped, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Her hands clenched the bedsheet, her knuckles white. "Seriously, Graham? The car? That's all you care about? I could have died. Our twins could have died. And you're worried about the car repair bill?" Graham didn't flinch. His face remained stony, his tone maddeningly indifferent. "But nothing happened to them, did it?" he said flatly. "Why stress over what didn't happen?" Aurora's breath caught in her throat, her fury boiling over. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of raw, uncontainable anger. "You're heartless," she spat, her voice rising. "Absolutely heartless. Those what-ifs you're brushing aside, they were real for me. I thought I'd lost them, Graham. I thought I'd lost our babies. Do you even care about them? Do you even care about me?" Graham opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. His expression remained unreadable, his silence only fueling Aurora's frustration. "Answer me," she demanded, her voice breaking. "Do you even care?" After a long pause, Graham shrugged. "Of course I care," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "I just don't see the point in overreacting to something that didn't happen. The twins are fine, you're fine. That's what matters, isn't it?" Aurora's heart sank. His apathy was like a weight crushing her chest. She looked away, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. Here's the revised and expanded version, adding depth and emotional intensity to the scene. Days later, Aurora packed her belongings and left the hospital. Her body still ached, and her head throbbed faintly from the concussion. But the real pain was in her heart. As she sat in the back seat of the taxi, staring out at the city rushing by, she felt a growing sense of loss. Graham was no longer the man she had loved, no longer the man who had once been her partner in everything. The distance between them wasn't just emotional. It was a chasm, a void that seemed to grow wider every time she thought about his indifference, his cruel words. She longed to pinpoint when things had gone wrong, but the answers eluded her. The man she'd married felt like a stranger now, leaving her to grapple with the crushing realization that their marriage was falling apart. Aurora tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on her babies. They were her light in this darkness, her reason to keep moving forward. She resolved to stay strong for them, no matter what. But her struggles were far from over. One evening, while folding laundry in the quiet of their home, Aurora's hands froze as she lifted one of Graham's shirts. Her heart stopped for a beat as she stared at the glaring red stain on the collar. Lipstick. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of it, but deep down, she already knew. She clutched the shirt tightly, her knuckles white, as anger and heartbreak surged through her. When Graham walked into the room moments later, she turned to face him, holding up the shirt. Her voice trembled with emotion. "What's this, Graham?" Graham stopped in his tracks, his eyes flickering to the shirt in her hand. For a moment he said nothing, his face a mask of hesitation. But then, as if deciding it wasn't worth the effort to lie, he straightened his posture and crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "It's exactly what you think it is," he said, his tone cold and unapologetic. "I have another woman. We love each other." Aurora felt the world crumble around her. Her knees went weak, and she gripped the back of a chair for support. "What?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "But we're having children, Graham. Our twins. How can you say this now?" Graham's face remained emotionless, his voice as detached as ever. "That's exactly why I wanted you to have an abortion," he said bluntly, his words slicing through her like a blade. "I don't want to be tied down with kids. I told you it was too soon, and honestly, this isn't working anymore, Aurora. We need to get a divorce." Aurora stared at him, her breath coming in shallow gasps as her mind struggled to process the betrayal, the callousness of his words. Her heart shattered into pieces, each one piercing her chest with unbearable pain. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice trembling with fury and despair. "You've known for months that I'm carrying our children, and now you tell me you want a divorce. And for what? Another woman. Are you even hearing yourself?" Graham shrugged, his indifference only adding fuel to her anger. "I've tried, Aurora, but we're not the same people anymore. This isn't what I want. I'm sorry." "Sorry," she repeated, her voice rising. "You're sorry? Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" He didn't answer, and the silence was deafening. Aurora packed her belongings in silence, her hands trembling as she folded the last of her clothes into a worn suitcase. Every corner of the home she had shared with Graham seemed to mock her, a reminder of the life she had once dreamed of, now shattered. With one final glance at the place that no longer felt like hers, she walked out the door and didn't look back. She sought refuge in her late mother's small apartment, a modest, somewhat cramped space that had been left untouched since her passing. The scent of lavender lingered faintly in the air, a painful reminder of her mother's warmth and the security she once brought. Aurora dropped her bags by the couch, her legs giving way as she sank into it, her body heavy with exhaustion and despair. Alone in the dimly lit apartment, the weight of betrayal crashed down on her. She fought to hold herself together, but her emotions spilled over in quiet sobs. Yet, even in the midst of her heartbreak, one thought kept her grounded. I must be strong for my babies. They need me. It was a mantra she repeated over and over, willing herself to believe it, but as the hours passed, the enormity of her situation began to sink in. "It's one thing to say," she whispered, her voice breaking in the stillness of the room, "but another to do." No matter how much she tried to reassure herself, the reality loomed over her like a dark cloud. How was she supposed to live alone with 2 newborns? She was unemployed, and her savings, though carefully managed during her teaching career, were modest at best. Graham's income had been their main support. His small business, while not extravagant, had kept them comfortable. Without it, her future felt uncertain, fragile. Her thoughts spiraled into a storm of anxiety, and with them came the familiar throbbing in her head. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to will the pain away, but it only grew stronger. "No, not now," she muttered, her voice tinged with panic. The headache intensified, sharp and relentless, until it became unbearable. Aurora clutched her head, tears spilling from her eyes as her vision blurred. Then, to her horror, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. Her hands flew to her belly, panic surging through her as she felt a strange rippling sensation. "No, no, no," she whispered frantically, her voice shaking. "Not my babies. Please, God, not my babies." The pain grew worse and terror gripped her heart. Every second felt like an eternity, the fear of losing her unborn children overwhelming her. These pains again. "I can't handle this on my own," she said, her voice breaking as she struggled to think clearly. She fumbled for her phone with trembling hands, her vision swimming as she dialed the emergency number. When the operator answered, Aurora's words came out in desperate gasps. I'm pregnant. Severe headache. Abdominal pain. I need help. Please hurry." The operator assured her help was on the way, but Aurora barely heard it. Her strength was failing. She stumbled to the front door, gripping the wall for support as she forced herself to open it, knowing she wouldn't have the energy to answer when the medics arrived. After that, darkness. It was as though Aurora's memory had been wiped clean of everything that had happened after she fell. The moments before she lost consciousness felt like a distant, murky dream. When she opened her eyes, the world was blindingly bright. White walls, a white ceiling, and sterile fluorescent lights greeted her. She squinted, immediately shutting her eyes again against the harsh glare. Gradually, she forced them open, her vision adjusting to the brightness. Blurs of grey and white moved toward her. Shapes took form. Faces. Doctors, she realized. One face in particular seemed familiar, but Aurora couldn't place it. A sudden panic gripped her as she remembered the excruciating pain that had overtaken her body. Her hands shot to her belly, dread pooling in her chest. But then she felt it, the reassuring swell of her large belly, her twins still nestled safely inside. Relief swept through her like a tide, and she let out a shaky sigh. Her moment of peace was interrupted by a voice warm and cheerful. "Hello, Mrs. Donovan. You're awake. That's wonderful," exclaimed one of the men in a white coat, stepping closer to her. "How are you feeling?" Aurora turned her gaze toward the speaker, her brow furrowing. It was the man with the familiar face, though she still couldn't quite place him. His bright, kind eyes met hers, and something about his presence felt strangely comforting. "Better than yesterday," Aurora replied, her voice raspy and weak. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "But what's wrong with me, doctor?" The man offered a small smile, his tone calm but enigmatic. "We're not entirely sure yet," he said. "We'll need to run some additional tests to figure it out. For now, you're stable, and your babies are doing well. That's the most important thing." Aurora frowned, confusion etched on her face. "But I was just recently examined," she said. "They didn't find anything then." The doctor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, I saw that in your records. However, given the severity of the pain you experienced, we need to investigate further. If we find anything, we'll start treatment right away. In the meantime, focus on resting and staying calm. You're in good hands." His voice was soothing, carrying a warmth that put Aurora at ease despite her lingering anxiety. "My name, by the way, is Evan Ashton," he added with a touch of humour, as if delivering a rehearsed line. "I'll be overseeing your care during your stay." Aurora couldn't help but smile faintly. There was something about Dr. Ashton's voice, a quiet confidence that made her believe everything would be okay. She leaned back against the pillows, allowing herself to relax. Her mind drifted to her babies, the thought of them filling her heart with a fragile sense of hope. Despite everything, the pain, Graham's betrayal, the uncertainty of her future, her excitement for their arrival was undiminished. They were her light, her reason to keep moving forward. "What will I name them?" she wondered aloud, her voice soft. Names had crossed her mind before, but nothing ever felt quite right. Until now. She thought back to the fairy tales she had loved as a child, Jack and the Beanstalk. The memory brought a faint smile to her lips. "That's it," she whispered, her eyes lighting up for the first time in days. Jack and Jill. Why not? I like it. Aurora stared at Dr. Ashton, her eyes wide and unblinking. It felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. She was frozen, not from the shock of her diagnosis, but from the flood of memories rushing back, memories of that fateful day. Her thoughts raced, connecting the dots she hadn't been able to piece together before. Her curiosity and fear rapidly shifted into something sharper, something hotter: anger. Her voice trembled as she spoke, tears threatening to spill. "It was you," she said, her tone rising. "It was you that slammed into my car that day, wasn't it?" Dr. Ashton's calm demeanour faltered. His eyebrows arched slightly, sorrow and regret filling his expression. He sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging as he looked directly at Aurora. "Mrs. Donovan," he began softly, "please, let me explain." But Aurora wasn't ready to listen. She was trembling, her voice shaking as she pointed an accusing finger at him. "You caused this. You caused everything. My babies, my pain, everything that's happened to me since that day." Evan stepped closer but kept his voice measured. "You're right," he admitted, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "It was me behind the wheel that day. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I owe you the truth." Aurora stared at him, her breathing shallow. The room felt impossibly small. "Then why didn't you say anything before?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Evan sighed again, his tone heavy with regret. "Because I wasn't allowed to. Let me tell you everything that happened that day, Aurora. Please." She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told him to continue. "Yes, I was driving that day," he said, his voice steady but tinged with guilt. "But you came out of nowhere. You were trying to merge, and I didn't even have time to react. By the time I saw your car, it was too late." He paused, glancing down at his hands as if reliving the moment. Aurora's lips parted, but no words came out. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. "I'm a doctor," Evan continued, meeting her gaze again. "So, I did everything I could to help you before the paramedics arrived. I stabilized you, checked for signs of harm to the babies, and stayed with you until they took you to the hospital. But after that..." He hesitated, his voice dropping. "The police got involved. They launched an investigation, and it was determined that you had broken the traffic rules. Legally, the accident was your fault. They told me I couldn't contact you or visit you in the hospital, that it would only complicate things." Aurora's jaw tightened, anger still simmering beneath the surface. "And that's supposed to make it okay?" she snapped. "That's supposed to erase what I went through?" Evan shook his head. "No, it doesn't make it okay. I'm not trying to justify anything. I need you to know that I never meant for this to happen, Aurora. I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry." His voice was earnest, and for the first time, Aurora noticed the weight of guilt etched on his face. But his next words took her by surprise. "When I saw you here as my patient, I thought it might be fate," he said, his voice quieter now. "That maybe I was meant to help you heal, not just physically, but in some way, make up for what happened." Aurora blinked, stunned by his admission. She turned away, her hands gripping the hospital bed's railing for support. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. "Fate," she whispered bitterly, her voice trembling. "Is that what you think this is? Some kind of cosmic apology?" Evan hesitated, then replied softly, "Maybe. Or maybe it's just coincidence. Either way, I want to help you, Aurora. I owe you that much." Aurora's tears finally spilled over, but they were no longer just tears of anger. They were a mixture of exhaustion, frustration, and the overwhelming weight of her circumstances. "You can't fix what's already broken, Dr. Ashton," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You can't undo what happened to me that day. Or what's happened since." Evan nodded solemnly. "No, I can't, but I'll do everything I can to help you now. You and your babies." Aurora turned back to him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing, the air thick with tension. Then, finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, her voice wavering. but for the sake of my children, I'll let you help me." Evan gave a small nod, understanding in his eyes. "That's all I ask, Aurora. Let me help you." After a pause, Dr. Ashton's voice dropped to a gentler tone as he continued. "The cancer couldn't have come from the accident, Aurora. It was already there. The concussion from the collision may have accelerated its progression, but it wasn't the cause." Aurora didn't respond. Her arms fell limp at her sides, and her gaze dropped to the cold, sterile floor. Her mind felt like it was spinning, her thoughts tangled and incoherent. Slowly she raised her tear-filled eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what about my children?" she asked, her tone tinged with desperation. Will they make me have an abortion?" Dr. Ashton straightened, his expression immediately shifting to one of reassurance. "What? Of course not," he exclaimed, his voice firm. "Your pregnancy is complicated, yes, but both babies are doing fine. There are no detected abnormalities. When the time comes, you'll have a scheduled C-section. That's all. No one is taking your babies from you, Aurora." Though his words were meant to comfort, Aurora felt a hollow ache in her chest. The news of the tumor had hit her harder than she thought possible, drowning out any solace the doctor tried to offer. Her mind flashed to the stories she had heard about cancer, terrible, tragic stories that had always seemed distant, belonging to others. She had never imagined they could become her reality. Without thinking, the first question that escaped her lips was, "Will my hair fall out?" Dr. Ashton sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. He had been expecting questions, but this one stung in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Aurora," he said gently, his voice tinged with sorrow. "Believe me, losing your hair is the least of your concerns. You will be treated. You're already being treated. We'll start therapy in doses that are safe for the babies, and you'll be monitored by the best oncologists in the city. That's my promise." Aurora nodded faintly, though her eyes were distant. She wasn't reassured. Not yet. The weight of the diagnosis pressed on her like a suffocating blanket. Evan watched her closely, his chest tightening with pity and guilt. She was so young, so vibrant, yet already so exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. And yet he noticed something that broke his heart further. No one ever came to visit her. Not her husband. Not a relative. Not even a friend. The hospital staff whispered about it, their murmurs a mixture of sympathy and judgment. "Where's her family? Her husband?" they asked. "Who's helping her?" Aurora was utterly alone, navigating a storm no one should face without support. Evan felt a pang of guilt twist inside him, one that he couldn't shake. As irrational as it was, a question haunted him. What if she's right? What if the accident triggered this disease? What if the tumor was dormant and the trauma woke it up? He knew the medical evidence didn't support that theory, but guilt wasn't rational. It gnawed at him, growing heavier with each passing moment, and yet he couldn't bring himself to confess this feeling to Aurora. As his thoughts churned, Aurora's voice broke the silence. Her tone was heavy, resigned. "Tell me, doctor," she began, her eyes meeting his with a piercing intensity, "how much time do I have left?" The question left Evan stunned. He hesitated, his lips parting but no sound escaping. "Why aren't you answering?" Aurora pressed, her voice trembling. "I know cancer is incurable, just tell me the truth. How long do I have?" Evan took a deep breath, steadying himself. "There's no definitive answer," he said softly. "It could be a month, or it could be 15 years. There have even been cases where people lived to old age with this disease." Aurora's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "I won't live that long," she said, the words dripping with resignation. Her voice was barely audible now, as though speaking louder would make her fears more real. Slowly she rose from her chair, her movements stiff and deliberate, her shoulders slumped, and she shuffled toward the door, her steps heavy with despair. She paused briefly in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame as if summoning the strength to move forward. But she didn't know then that she would never cross that threshold again. Aurora wanted to scream. She wanted to bang her head against the wall, to thrash against the overwhelming horror that consumed her. But thoughts of her unborn children stopped her. She placed her hands on her belly, cradling the fragile lives within her, and drew in a shaky breath. She understood everything now, the cancer, the risks, the impossible battle ahead. And so she withdrew into herself, locking her emotions away behind an iron wall. The urge to cry, to collapse under the weight of it all, faded into a strange calm. Surprisingly, there was no pain that day, not the searing headaches, nor the sharp ripples through her abdomen. Her body felt light, almost serene, as though granting her a reprieve after the emotional storm. Perhaps that was why, for the first time in days, she managed to suppress her tears and drift into sleep like a child, her dreams mercifully void of the nightmare her waking life had become. After Aurora left his office, Evan Ashton sat at his desk, staring at a single spot on the wall. The stark white paint blurred before his eyes as guilt gnawed at him, an unwelcome and relentless companion. No matter how much he rationalized, no matter how many medical facts he reminded himself of, the weight of Aurora's pain refused to leave him. That day felt like it slipped from his grasp entirely. His work, his purpose, all of it seemed futile. Even his colleagues noticed the shift in his demeanor. "A tough patient, huh?" one teased, nudging him lightly as they passed in the hallway. "But you'll manage. You're our superstar." Evan forced a weak smile, but the words stung. He knew they were meant as encouragement, maybe even admiration, but in that moment they only deepened his torment. Many of his peers envied him. At just 32 years old, Evan was already the head of the obstetrics department, a rising star, a top-notch specialist who excelled in handling even the most complex cases. He was the one patients trusted, the one surgeons turned to in the most delicate moments. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was failing. "Maybe they're all waiting for me to slip up," he thought bitterly. Perhaps Aurora's case is just what they've been waiting for. The thought burrowed into his mind, amplifying his self-doubt. He replayed every interaction with Aurora, analyzing every word, every glance. Was there something more he could have said? Could he have eased her pain, even slightly? The questions circled endlessly, leaving him no room for peace. Not at work, not even at home. That evening, Evan's wife, Leona, greeted him with her usual warmth as he walked through the door. "Long day?" she asked, her tone light and curious. Evan barely looked at her, shrugging as he dropped his bag by the door. "Something like that," he muttered, waving her off like an annoying fly. He hated himself for the dismissive gesture the moment he did it, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything more. Leona frowned, concern flashing across her face, but she didn't press him. They had been married for 12 years, and she knew him well enough to sense when he needed space. Evan had married young, at just 20 years old, and despite the years that had passed, his love for Leona had never dulled. She was his anchor, the person who grounded him when life felt overwhelming. But tonight, not even her presence could ease the turmoil in his mind. For the first time in years, Evan went to bed early, leaving his dinner untouched. He lay staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the image of Aurora's tear-filled eyes or the despair in her voice when she asked, "How much time do I have left?" Her words echoed in his mind, a haunting refrain that followed him into his restless sleep. The next morning, Evan was jolted awake by the shrill ring of his phone. The piercing sound cut through the quiet pre-dawn stillness, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. Groggy and disoriented, he fumbled for the phone on his nightstand, his heart already racing. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. Something's wrong, he thought, his professional instincts kicking in as dread settled in his chest. The voice on the other end was shaky, uncertain. It was one of the interns. "Dr. Ashton Aurora Donovan. I think she's—" The young man stammered, his words trailing off. "What?" Evan shouted, sitting bolt upright. "Speak up! What happened?" The intern's mumbled response was drowned out by Evan's pounding heartbeat. He didn't even process the rest of the call. His body was already moving, his mind singularly focused. He couldn't remember how he got to the hospital, only that his car seemed to drive itself. He arrived in a state of frantic agitation, his thoughts racing faster than his feet as he bolted through the hospital corridors. What could have happened? There were no signs of danger. She was fine just yesterday, he thought feverishly, his breath quick and shallow. As he approached Aurora's room, the sight of doctors and nurses clustered around her bed made his stomach drop. A cold sweat broke out on his brow as he pushed through the small crowd, his voice sharp and commanding. "Step aside. What are you all doing here like this as some kind of spectacle? She's my patient," he barked, his tone cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The staff parted reluctantly, their faces a mixture of concern and hesitation. Evan's sharp, analytical mind took over, honed by years of training and experience. He only needed one look at Aurora to understand the situation. Her body was still unnaturally so, yet there was a faint rise and fall to her chest. Her eyes were closed, her face pale but not lifeless. "She's not dead. She's in a coma," Evan announced confidently, his voice cutting through the murmurs of doubt in the room. His words sent a wave of shock through the gathered staff. Acting quickly, Evan began issuing precise instructions. Connect her to life support immediately, monitor her vitals every 15 minutes, prepare for further testing to assess neurological activity. Within minutes, the room transformed into a coordinated flurry of activity. Machines beeped steadily as Aurora was stabilized, but Evan's confidence wavered when he turned his attention to the latest ultrasound results for her babies. Just 3 days ago, both twins had been doing fine, healthy, developing as expected. But today the situation had changed drastically. Both babies were showing signs of rapid physical and neurological complications. Their tiny, vulnerable lives were now hanging by a thread. Evan stared at the results in stunned silence, a cold chill running down his spine. The guilt he thought he had managed to bury came crashing back, relentless and suffocating. "You ruined this woman by crashing into her car," his inner voice taunted mercilessly. "And now you've failed to protect her children." Evan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "It's not my fault," he muttered under his breath, as though arguing with a phantom. "It is your fault," the voice persisted, louder now, echoing in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. The guilt felt palpable, as though the very walls of the room were accusing him. The weight of it pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, like a bolt of lightning, the solution struck him. An emergency operation to save the babies. They would be premature, fragile, and weak. They were already showing signs of distress. The odds were not in their favor, but it was their only chance. A slim, precarious chance, but a chance nonetheless. Evan's hands shook as he grabbed a clipboard, hurriedly sketching out a plan for the operation. He knew the risks were immense, but doing nothing wasn't an option. Yet even as he moved with determination, the voice in his head lashed at him again. "And what about Aurora, their mother? Have you forgotten about her? She eagerly awaited these babies. She fought for them. And now you're ready to sacrifice her?" Evan froze, the pen in his hand hovering over the clipboard. He hadn't forgotten about Aurora. Not for a single second, but deep down, he knew the truth. Her body, already ravaged by illness, wouldn't survive the stress of such an operation. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to confront the unbearable reality. Aurora would not leave the operating table alive. For a moment he closed his eyes, gripping the pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. The decision he faced felt like a cruel paradox: save the babies and lose the mother, or risk losing all three. Evan lost track of time during the surgery. The sterile hum of machines and the steady rhythm of voices in the operating room blurred into the background. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to imagine that this was just another procedure, that the mother was healthy and the babies about to be born were perfect in every way. But reality had a cruel way of intruding. The mother was gravely ill, and the babies were fighting for their lives before they had even drawn their first breaths. The first baby, a girl, was delivered with a single cry that pierced the room. For a brief, fragile moment, that cry brought joy to everyone present. A cry meant life. It meant hope. But when Evan looked closer, his heart sank. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. The girl's optic nerves had not developed properly. She was nearly blind. Evan swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain composed. Focus, he told himself. There was still the boy. Maybe, just maybe, the boy would be okay. But half an hour later, his hopes were dashed. The boy was diagnosed with a severe congenital heart defect, a condition that would require immediate surgeries and lifelong medical care. Evan's devastation was inward, his carefully composed exterior hiding the storm raging within. His mind repeated the same grim mantra. You did the right thing. You knew there would be complications. What were you expecting? Miracles? Miracles don't happen. Yet the mantra offered no comfort, no absolution. He had known the risks, but knowing didn't make it any easier to face the reality unfolding before him. Aurora remained unconscious throughout the ordeal, her fragile body lying still on the table. Several times during the operation, her blood pressure had dropped dangerously low. Each time, the team scrambled to stabilize her, their combined effort barely keeping her tethered to life. As Evan stood over her now, his thoughts strayed to her ignorance of the truth. Perhaps it's better this way, he thought bitterly. She doesn't know. She doesn't have to face this pain. Not yet. When the surgery was finally over, Evan left the operating room with a heavy heart. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a tired hand, exhaustion settling into his bones. It was over. The bare minimum had been achieved. The mother and her children were alive. Sick, but alive. For most doctors, this outcome might have brought relief, a fragile sense of success. But for Evan, it felt like a hollow victory. The weight of guilt pressed on him like a physical force, heavy and unrelenting. It wasn't just the knowledge of Aurora's suffering or her children's conditions. It was the crushing realization that no matter how hard he had tried, he couldn't save them from this cruel twist of fate. He couldn't undo what had happened. 3 days later, Evan's already fragile emotional state reached its breaking point. On a quiet Sunday morning, Aurora passed away. The news hit Evan like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think. It felt as though the walls of the hospital were closing in on him, suffocating him with the weight of his failure. He had known it was coming. Her body had been too weak, her illness too advanced. But knowing didn't make it any easier. For most doctors, Aurora's passing would have been just another case, another name in a long line of patients. But not for Evan. He had desperately wanted her to survive, not just because she was his patient, but because her resilience, her fierce love for her children, had moved him in a way he couldn't explain. He had hoped, prayed even, for a miracle, despite telling himself they didn't happen. Evan sat in the empty break room that morning, staring blankly at the coffee cup in his hands. His colleagues gave him space, sensing the storm raging beneath his calm facade. He was a doctor. He was supposed to be the one who fixed things, who brought life into the world, who saved people. But he wasn't a god of medicine. He couldn't stave off death. And now, a mother was gone, leaving behind 2 fragile, struggling newborns. Evan clenched his jaw, his hands tightening around the cup until his knuckles turned white. He thought of Aurora's last words to him before the surgery, her quiet, resigned bitterness. "I won't live that long." But her children remain, Evan reminded himself as he sat in his office, exhausted but unable to rest. And Aurora deserves a proper burial, according to Christian traditions. No one visited her in the hospital, but surely she has relatives, her husband, at least. Evan had tried calling Graham multiple times over the past 3 days, but each attempt ended in frustration. Finally, he decided there was no other option. He would go to Graham's home in person. When he arrived at the address listed in Aurora's records, a young woman answered the door. She was half-dressed, hastily tying her robe as she regarded him with curiosity and slight apprehension. "Are you here for Graham?" she asked hesitantly, her eyes scanning his face. Evan nodded, already sensing something was amiss. "Yes, I suppose I am," he replied, keeping his voice calm despite the unease creeping into his chest. "Ela, what's going on?" "Who's at the door?" a man's voice called from inside the apartment. Moments later, a man appeared in the doorway, his hair damp and water droplets still clinging to his freshly shaven face. His vitality was starkly at odds with the somber purpose of Evan's visit. "I'm here regarding your wife, Aurora," Evan said curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. The young woman, Isla, gasped, her face contorted in shock. "Your what? Wife?" she exclaimed, turning to stare at Graham with wide eyes. Graham, however, remained unfazed. His expression didn't even flicker as he responded smoothly. "Isla, come on, don't be silly, I don't have a wife. Never had one. This is just a misunderstanding. He's got the wrong door." He turned back to Isla, his tone softening slightly. "Go on to the bathroom. You said you wanted to shower, right?" Isla hesitated, casting another curious glance at Evan, but eventually shrugged and walked back into the apartment. Once she was out of earshot, Graham stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. "Let's step outside," he muttered, lightly nudging Evan backward. Evan crossed his arms, his gaze hard and unyielding. "So, do you have a wife named Aurora or not?" he asked again, his voice sharper now. Graham sighed, his irritation showing. "Yes, I had a wife named Aurora, but we're divorced now. I have a right to my own personal life, and I don't want to drag my past into it," he replied, his tone harsh and brazen. Evan froze, stunned by the sheer callousness of the response. He stared at Graham, searching for some sign of humanity, but found none. "What's the matter with you? Who even are you?" Graham snapped, his annoyance growing. Evan's voice turned cold. "I'm your wife's doctor, your ex-wife's doctor. She passed away yesterday in the hospital. She left behind 2 newborn children. Will you take them in as their father?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Evan hadn't expected much, but Graham's reaction still managed to shock him. Graham's face paled instantly, his confident demeanour crumbling. His lower lip quivered slightly as he stammered, I can't take them. But there are orphanages for that. They can go there." At those words, something inside Evan snapped. Without another word, he spun around and began descending the stairs, his footsteps echoing sharply in the stairwell. "Where are you going?" Graham called after him, his voice tinged with a mix of panic and frustration. "There's nothing more to discuss," Evan replied over his shoulder, not bothering to slow down. "Wait a second, I'll be right out," Graham shouted, disappearing back into the apartment. Evan paused reluctantly on the landing, unsure why he didn't keep walking. A moment later, Graham reappeared, holding a small bundle wrapped in crumpled paper. "What's this?" Evan asked, frowning as Graham extended the bundle toward him. "Money," Graham said bluntly. "Please, use it to bury Aurora. I can't do it myself, but I want her to be buried properly." Evan recoiled slightly, disgusted by the gesture. "I'm asking you to take responsibility for your children, not throw money at the problem." "I'm asking you. Take it," Graham insisted, his tone bordering on desperation. Evan stared at the bundle in Graham's outstretched hand, a bitter taste rising in his mouth. After a long, tense silence, he took a step back, shaking his head. Keep your money, Graham, he said firmly. It won't absolve you. Without another word, Evan turned and walked away, leaving Graham standing in the hallway, the bundle still in his hand. For a fleeting moment, guilt flashed across Graham's face, but he quickly buried it, retreating back into his apartment as if shutting the door could erase the consequences of his actions. The weekend became a relentless trial for Evan. The weight of guilt and responsibility consumed him, leaving no room for peace. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think clearly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Aurora's face, her babies, and the cold indifference of Graham. Leona, his wife, watched him with deep concern. She knew the entire story of Aurora. There were no secrets between them. Leona had always admired Evan's unwavering commitment to his patients, his belief that he could make a difference in even the most dire circumstances. But this situation was different, and it had shaken him to his core. On Sunday evening, Evan sat slumped in his chair, his face pale and drawn. He looked at Leona with exhausted eyes, red from sleepless nights. "Leona, this has broken me," he said quietly. "I can't do it anymore. Tomorrow I'm submitting my resignation." Leona's heart sank at his words. She knew how much Evan's work meant to him, how deeply he tied his identity to his ability to heal and protect. "Evan, don't rush," she pleaded, her voice gentle but firm. Evan frowned, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why wait, Leona? Why? What's the point? I failed her. I failed her children. How can I face anyone at that hospital again?" Leona didn't respond immediately. She stood silently, walking over to the window and gazing out into the darkening sky. Her back was to him, but Evan noticed the subtle way her shoulders trembled. After a moment, he rose from his chair, his frustration ebbing as concern for his wife took over. He walked to her side, his movements tentative. "Leona," he asked softly, "what's wrong? Are you crying?" Leona didn't answer right away. She wiped her tears with trembling hands before turning to face him. Her cheeks were streaked with emotion, and her eyes glistened with unspoken thoughts. "I'm just wondering what's going to happen to those innocent babies," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Evan's heart softened at her words. He reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "Leona, that's why I love you so much. Your heart. It's always in the right place. Even now, you're thinking about them." Leona gave him a watery smile, but there was something deeper in her gaze, a determination he hadn't seen before. She took a deep breath and spoke again, her words careful, yet resolute. "Evan, I've been thinking. Maybe we should take Aurora's children in. We can be their parents." Evan stared at her, stunned. "Are you serious? You want to take Aurora's children?" Leona nodded, her voice steady. "Yes. They need someone, Evan. And I think that someone is us." Evan hesitated, his mind racing. "But they're sick," he said, his voice faltering. Leona's expression didn't waver. "Why do you keep saying that? Yes, they're sick, but it's not terminal. They're babies, Evan. They need love and care. We'll treat them. We'll give them a chance." Her conviction left Evan speechless. He knew Leona's words came from a deeply personal place. Years ago, she had been a competitive equestrian, her life defined by grace and control. But a tragic fall during her pregnancy had shattered that world, leaving her unable to have children. The word infertility had felt like a death sentence, robbing her of the dreams she had nurtured. Evan had been there through it all, holding her as she grieved. They had built a life together, one filled with love and shared purpose, but the ache of not having children had always lingered, unspoken but ever present. Aurora's story had stirred something in Leona, a spark she thought had long since been extinguished. "Evan," she continued, her voice soft but unyielding, "we can do this. We can give them a home. We can give them love. They've lost their mother and their father." She trailed off, her lips pressing into a thin line at the thought of Graham's cruelty. They deserve better, and we can give them better. Evan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Her words swirled in his mind, fighting against the doubts and fears that had taken root there. Hours passed as he sat at his desk, his thoughts a chaotic storm of guilt, hope, and uncertainty. Finally, he emerged from his study, his decision made. He found Leona sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face. Evan crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her hands in his own. "All right," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let's do it. Let's take Aurora's children." Leona's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. Evan felt a weight lift from his chest, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. His wife's determination had ignited something in him, a reminder of why he had chosen medicine in the first place. "We'll make it work," he said softly. "Together." That night, for the first time in days, Evan felt a flicker of hope. Leona's words filled him with newfound confidence, as though wings had grown on his back. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. They would face the challenges ahead as a family. 3 months had passed since Evan and Leona welcomed Jack and Jill into their lives. The once quiet house was now filled with the joyful chaos of babies' cries, laughter, and the gentle hum of lullabies. Unbeknownst to them, they had named the twins exactly as Aurora had wished, fulfilling a dream she had never shared. Leona, who had spent years yearning for children, felt whole in a way she never thought possible. Her days were immersed in the care of her little ones, feeding, rocking, and marvelling at their every milestone. Every coo and giggle felt like a gift. Evan, despite the long hours at the hospital, had stepped fully into fatherhood. He discovered a side of himself he hadn't known existed, a patient, loving, and playful dad. He would often come home early just to bathe the twins or read to them as they drifted off to sleep. The bond between the 4 of them grew stronger with each passing day. Their lives weren't without challenges. Jack's vision required special care, and Jill underwent several surgeries to correct her heart defect. But Evan and Leona faced these hurdles together, united by their unwavering love for the children. The twins' 5th birthday arrived in a flurry of excitement. Leona had planned a small family dinner at their favourite Italian restaurant, complete with balloons and a custom cake. Jack and Jill, dressed in matching outfits, could hardly contain their excitement. As they prepared to leave, Evan called for a taxi, deciding to leave the family car behind for a relaxed evening. The yellow cab arrived promptly, and the driver, a middle-aged man with weathered features, greeted them warmly. "Hop in, folks. Where to?" the driver asked, as he adjusted the rearview mirror. Evan rattled off the restaurant's address and the cab pulled into traffic. Jack and Jill chatted excitedly in the back seat, their voices filling the car. The driver, Graham, smiled as he glanced at them in the mirror. "Got your hands full there, huh?" he said with a chuckle. Evan smiled politely. "Yeah, they keep us busy." Graham turned the conversation to small talk. "How old are they? Twins, huh?" Leona, holding Jack's hand in the back seat, chimed in with a laugh. 5 today. It's their birthday, actually." Graham grinned. "Happy birthday to them. 5's a big milestone. You must be proud." Evan nodded, a soft smile playing on his lips. "We are. They're incredible kids." The ride continued in light conversation, with Graham occasionally glancing back at the lively twins. As they neared their destination, Graham commented, "You've got a beautiful family. They're lucky to have you two." "Thank you," Leona replied warmly as the car came to a stop in front of the restaurant. The kids tumbled out of the car, laughing and racing toward the brightly lit entrance. Leona followed, calling after them to slow down. Evan lingered to pay the fare. He handed Graham a $50 bill. "Keep the change," Evan said with a polite smile as he looked directly at the driver. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Recognition struck. Both men froze. Graham's smile faltered as realization dawned, his face shifting from confusion to disbelief. Evan remained calm, his expression neutral but knowing. Graham swallowed hard. Evan didn't speak, but gave a single firm nod. The twins were now at the restaurant door, their laughter drifting back to the car. Graham's gaze followed them, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He stepped out of the car, his movements slow, almost hesitant, as if the weight of the moment was too much to bear. He stood beside Evan, his eyes locked on the twins. For a long moment, they both remained silent. Graham's face contorted with regret and sorrow, his shoulders slumping as if crushed by the weight of his past choices. Finally, he turned to Evan, his voice cracking. "Thank you for giving them what I couldn't." Evan nodded, his voice steady but kind. "They're loved. That's all that matters." Graham exhaled deeply, his eyes lingering on the children one last time before he climbed back into the driver's seat. As the cab pulled away, Evan watched the taillights fade into the distance. Turning back toward the restaurant, he saw Leona holding the twins' hands, their faces glowing with excitement and happiness. He smiled softly, his heart full. "We are not defined by the choices we didn't make," he thought, "but by the love we choose to give." And with that, he joined his family, ready to celebrate the life they had built together.